Hello everyone, welcome to the Global Intellectual. First of all, let me thank all of you for the amazing love and support you have shown to me on my very first video. Today, we move westwards from Afghanistan to a very small country called Israel. Right from the time Israel was created, it has been surrounded with conflict. Imagine being an Israeli for a second, being surrounded by countries who even fail to recognize the existence of Israel. Their very purpose and objective from the time Israel was created was to wipe Israel out from the face of this planet. Yet today in 2021, Israel stands tall as one of the few standing stable democracies of that region. The story we are going to discuss today is about the Six-Day War and how Israel defeats four big Arab nations in just 6 days. But before we start off with that story, I have a small request. If by any means this channel has been able to add value to your knowledge, I would like to see you hit that red subscribe button and also the bell icon near it in order to get regular updates from the Global Intellectual. So without further ado, let's start off with this video. Now when it comes to conflict between Israel and its neighbors, one city comes into spotlight. That is the city of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem has had a lot of historic and religious significance. But if I go into that right now, it will probably take up the whole video. So it is good enough to understand for now that the city of Jerusalem holds a lot of religious significance for three major Abrahamic religions, the religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Historically, the people of these three religions always wanted to maintain their control over Jerusalem, and it is no different today. Jerusalem is still a bone of contention between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Now, there have always been military confrontations between Israel and its neighbors. However, in the 1960s, these confrontations escalated to a whole new level. What happened was that in April 1967, Syria shot down one Israeli tractor that was operating in the demilitarized zone between the two countries. Syria considered this as a serious act of encroachment by Israel. What followed next was a fierce artillery and aerial war wherein Syria lost 6 of its fighter jets. When the Egyptians came to know that 6 Syrian fighter jets have been shot down, they expelled the United Nations peacekeeping forces from the Sinai Peninsula. These troops were stationed there as a result of a resolution which was passed by the United Nations after the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. Further, the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser received a misintelligence report from the Soviet Union which stated that the Israelis were building up their troops on the Egyptian border. This made the Egyptians even more cautious about Israel. Hence, they blocked several Israeli ships on the Strait of Tiran. The Americans here at all costs wanted to avoid any confrontation between Israel and its Arab neighbors because they were already fighting the Vietnam War. Seeing the escalating situation, the Israeli leaders met in the early days of June 1967 and decided to carry out preemptive strikes on Egypt. Hence began the Six-Day War between Egypt, Israel, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. Even before the war started, Israel knew that it was at a numerical disadvantage when compared to its Arab neighbors. See, that is one thing you must learn from Israel. Israel always analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of its enemies, then comes out with a strategy and then executes it. That is the reason, more often than not, Israel comes out victorious from a war. A war without a plan of action is nothing but a suicide mission. Israel only had 100,000 troops compared to the 250,000 troops of the Allied forces. When it came to fighter jets, which could change the fate of any war, Israel only had 300 fighter jets compared to the 900 fighter jets of the Allied forces. Hence, even before the war began, Israel made its first move. All over Israeli media, there was this news that Israel had sent off its fighter pilots to a holiday. Hence, the Arab nations became complacent. They did not expect the Israeli Air Force to make a preemptive strike on them. In the early hours of 5th June 1967, Israel launched 200 fighter aircrafts towards the Mediterranean Sea. These aircrafts entered Egypt from the north and they completely decimated 14 Egyptian airfields. In less than 16 hours, 350 Egyptian aircrafts were destroyed while they sat at the ground. Aircrafts are of no use when they sit on the ground. Hence, Operation Focus was one of the most successful aerial attacks of military history. After coming to know that Israel had launched its offensive into Egypt, the other Arab nations jumped into the war. After destroying the Egyptian Air Force, the Israeli Air Force went on to destroy 28 Jordanian, 53 Syrian, and 10 Iraqi jets. By the evening of the first day, Israel had complete dominance over the skies of the Middle East. Operation Focus was hence a huge military success. Along with the war in the air, the war on the ground had begun. Israel now had to fight on three fronts. Although still numerically smaller than its adversaries, Israel now had one major advantage. It had complete dominance over the skies of the Middle East. On 7 June 1967, Israel captured the old city of Jerusalem from Jordan. The Israelis celebrated by praying at the Western Wall. On 8 June, Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. However, it had to stop its advance into Egypt because an armistice had been brokered between Egypt and Israel. On 9 June, Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria. On 10 June, the war stopped because the UN had brokered a peace agreement between the Arab countries and Israel. Just in 132 hours of fighting, 20,000 Arabs and 800 Israelis lost their lives. This was a massive victory for Israel. Israel had defeated four major Arab countries just in 6 days. After the war, the president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, decided to resign. However, he had to return back to his office after there were massive rallies in his support. The leaders of the Arab world met in Sudan and signed a resolution in which all of them confirmed that there would be no recognition, no negotiation, and no peace with Israel. In 1982, however, Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel, wherein it got back the Sinai Peninsula. The Israelis, on the other hand, were extremely happy. They had captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. To this date, Israel still retains large parts of the Golan Heights and the West Bank. Now we come to the most important part of this video. What do you learn from the 6 Day War? Well, you learn that it is not always the numbers that matter. You must know what can change the fate of your war. Israel knew that technology could change the fate of their war. Hence, they decided to handicap their enemies by destroying their air force. Number two, you also learn that you must not blindly trust third parties in times of conflict. Had Egypt verified the intelligence reports it received from the Soviet Union, this war might never have started. Just by reviewing the 6 Day War, I came to a very important conclusion in life. When you fight your own personal battles, it's not your age, your numbers, or your size that matters. There are some things in life that cannot be purchased from the market. You cannot purchase will, temperament, and courage from the market. You cannot purchase confidence from the market. These things are just God gifted, and by the grace of God, Israel has all of these gifts. Just as David defeated Goliath, Israel defeated its enemies. Benjamin Netanyahu once said that if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. That, my friends, is the collective conscience of the Israeli people that makes them win each and every war they fight. So, what is your opinion about the Arab-Israeli conflict? I would love to know that down in the comment section. If you learned something new from this video, do consider hitting that like button. Also, do share this video with someone so that they gain knowledge too. If you haven't subscribed to the Global Intellectual yet, I highly recommend that you press that red subscribe button and also the bell notification next to it to get regular updates about our channel. I will also leave a link to our Instagram page down in the description so that you can follow us there and get regular updates there too. With that, it is a wrap for this video. I promise to come back next week with another topic of geopolitics. Till then, goodbye and Jai Hind.